By the end of this, we might hate each other. We might hate this podcast.
You go vegetables on the bottom and then ground beef on top and then potatoes on top of that.
Can we transition to a podcast about my life choices?
Yes. Hi, you're listening to Pop-Up Podcasting. We make podcasting easy, so stick around for tips, tricks, and a behind-the-scenes look at the podcast industry. Hi, my name's Lisa, and in this episode, JP, Will, Ashley, and I will discuss using music in podcasts, when it works, when it doesn't, ideas for enhancing the use of music, and who gets to choose it.
How do you guys feel about music being used in podcasts?
I love it. I don't know what you guys think. I think I like it a lot. I think it's always helpful. It always improves things, is my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely, like it elevates it, right? Like, I don't know, like spoken word, it's fine. Obviously, if your content's compelling, it's going to be good. But I think that's how it's almost like the wrapping and like the bow on the gift.
I agree, but I think sometimes it can be done poorly or overdone. Like, I had a client the other day that had an hour-long podcast and said, what about adding some light background music throughout? What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, probably not that.
Yeah. Like I kind of just said, nah, it's not really done.
I've never been asked to do, like, I've never had that be brought up before.
No, I think it's a rare request for a reason.
Yeah, I think that would be like running music under like an hour podcast would be, I mean, to go back to my wrapping and bow simile, I guess. That's like, when people do like the gifts where they buy someone a toothbrush and then they like wrap it and put it in like 8 different boxes and make it super hard to unwrap and everything. I feel like it's like overdoing it if it's that much music.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I find that clients get excited when they hear their intro with music for the first time. And it's like, oh, this sounds like a real thing. Like just that little level of production of hearing some music that kind of sets the tone, sets their sort of brand, kicks things off, adds a little liveliness to the whole thing. Yeah, people's eyes kind of light up when they hear their podcast with music put in for the first time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
To go back to what JP said about like an hour-long podcast with music running throughout, would you say that there's an inappropriate time for that and an appropriate time for that?
For like having like that length of music?
Well, like not maybe that length, but like let's say the podcast was 15 minutes. Would it be inappropriate then to put music throughout?
I think if it was more of a monologue style, it could be appropriate, depending on what music it was, if it was subtle enough and if it was quiet enough that it didn't overshadow the person's voice. What do you guys think? Yeah,
like context matters, I think, right? Like as much as length, like saying like, running it under an hour just sounds like it's not going to work from the jump. And like 15 minutes, obviously that's shorter. So you're like, oh, maybe it would work. But I think it's more the context than the length of the podcast, if that makes sense. Like, maybe something more monologue style. And I mean, maybe depending on subject matter, it might, make sense to have something running underneath. Like I'm thinking almost something like solo narrative driven, and maybe it's like storytelling based. And so you want like music to heighten tension or something like that. Like maybe if you're thinking of like elements, but I don't know if I'd want like one music bed running under a show, like uninterrupted.
Right. But almost more like documentary style. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. To sort of like punctuate what's being said in a way.
Like more so like an ambient noise versus like a music bed.
Yeah, or even like a mix of
both.
The two necessarily. Yeah, exactly. Like I think if you're a little bit of variety in there, if you're like, okay, I'm set on, for whatever reason, I'm super attached to having music running under this entire thing. I think if you then maybe introduce a little bit of, I mean, I don't want you switching genres every 30 seconds or something like that, but having it suit the subject matter, I think is going to be the most important thing as opposed to just whether there is music or not.
Yeah. I think setting the tone too early on, like what kind of podcast is this that I'm listening to? Like we did a podcast years ago and mostly I worked on it, but the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and they had their podcast pretty much had wall to wall, either, music or sort of nature sounds or environmental sounds. And that worked because it was like from the get-go, you realize that this type of podcast is like a movie where there's scoring and there's sound effects and there's all this throughout. But I think if you had like a conversational podcast where all of a sudden just 20 minutes in, you're talking about something dramatic and you start to hear like boom, 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 and like some kind of intense music comes out of nowhere, then it kind of takes you out of it. But I think if you're setting the expectation early on that like this is a lots of music throughout kind of podcast, maybe you do okay. But in this example that I brought up, it's a conversational interview style podcast. And to me, yeah, that wall to wall music wouldn't make a lot of sense in that type of show.
On a more like basic note too, then maybe it's worth letting people know like the main things you would consider are where you would have music typically is your intro, your outro, and some transition spots. Like if you had a couple guests or something, one after the other.
Yep. And I think the music really allows sort of to piggyback on points that JP and Lisa, you've both made, is it lets you like, you talk about that initial impact when a client hears it for the first time. And, I can think of two shows that I've worked on that I believe both of you separately put together templates for. And I think of one, The Crow Patrol. When you listen to that one and, you're hearing the intro music and you're hearing like, like crows and stuff like it, I think that adds immersion to it. It sounds really awesome when you hear it. And we fight for that as well too, is it sounds simple, but like it's good music and you hear the bell ring. And like, I don't know, it really sets the, the scene for the podcast. And I think it's those little kind of details you can add in that really, really elevate the listening experience.
Those were both mine, by the way.
Lisa did both
of those. Nice. Yeah. Okay. So
they were great.
Credit to JP rescinded there and more given to Lisa.
I hired Lisa, so
yeah.
I kind of get a little bit of credit for everything she does.
It's a top-down kind of thing. Yeah.
I'll accept that.
No, for sure. And I think like those are the fun ones to put together, and both of those are great examples. A lot of podcasts, I think they work well with just like we pick an appropriate piece of music, we add some nice fades and cuts and make it rise and get exciting when it's, usually towards the end of the intro, there's a little crescendo, and those work really well. But then when we can bring in, sometimes it's mixing more than one piece of music or bringing in sound effects like Lisa did in both of those examples, where it's like this one is, we fight for that. And it's about sort of consumer rights and the telecom industry and all this. But like she brought in this cool boxing bell kind of thing because the title has fight in it. And then the Crow Patrol, which is literally about crows, had these crow caws mixed in, which is again just like puts you in that place. Like those first 30 seconds of the podcast is like situating me in like the world of the podcast, and also kind of setting the tone for like, this is a high quality production. It's not, it's not something that somebody just literally like, I don't know, hit record in their basement and, did it in an amateur way. I think it puts that level of polish on it that shows people that you care about your content and hopefully makes them care about it too.
Mm-hmm. That's maybe like one thing. Sometimes we choose the music and sometimes clients do. So some things we look for that's maybe worth letting people know when they are looking for their own music are things like that the song be long enough, that it have like a clear beginning, a clear closing, or like an easing out point and some rising interest throughout it.
Yeah. And a lack of lyrics. I've had a few people suggest songs with lyrics in the past, and that's tough when you're going to be talking over something to have another voice there in the background. Even if it's just some like, ooh, ah, whatever. Don't make me sing.
Yeah. Keep going, JP. Keep going. Give me more examples.
Singing. Ooh, ah.
Yeah.
Is there any time that you guys have run into like an issue with a client with them choosing their own music? And would you guys have to like tell them that this isn't like a good...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Lisa
Right?
loves that part.
It happens.
Cutting them down to size.
No, and then you just take a quick peek for them and make some recommendations and then see how that goes.
Yeah, it works differently for different clients, but sometimes we let them have a go at our royalty-free music library, and other times we'll kind of make some initial selections and like, I really like this one, and also here's 2 other options. But it can be a bit delicate, but most of the time people aren't super attached to those things, and they're okay to defer to us, the experts, I find, at least.
Yeah, we do most of the selecting, but we usually provide 2 or 3 options for people.
Yeah, and if it could be one of those things too, where if like maybe they're not, if you're just sending someone the song, it'd be one thing. They'd be like, oh, how does this fit? But it's like once you've like put that template together and you've put in, their intro voiceover and everything like that, then they're actually able to, it's then has their branding and everything attached to. And I think that's when you usually can get a little bit more of that buy-in from them as well.
Yeah, like sometimes I'll ask a client, here's the music library we use. Have a look around, send me a few options. And I'm always sure to ask them for a few options, because you can't really know how well it's going to work until you hear it mixed in with the voice and everything else. I've definitely had some times where I'm like, oh, this track is amazing, but it just like doesn't go with the voice, or the content, or the kind of pacing is off. And you only really find that out when you mix it in and hear it with the voice kind of in place as the audience is going to hear it.
Thanks for checking out Pop-Up Podcasting, podcasting made easy. If you're interested in learning more about podcasting or starting your own podcast, you can find us at popuppodcasting.ca, where you can download our free guide, Podcasting at Work.